The other thing that I've mentioned in passing that's really important is begin to take your dog's temperature when you start a session, and then recognize what they feel like when they're really into it, and recognize what it feels like when they start to taper off. So the first thing I do when I'm starting a new dog, before I do an engagement session, I do what I call prime the pump. I just give you a couple of pieces of food in a row, yes, feed you, yes, and I judge their intensity level. If they're like, all right, I'm not doing anything. I'm like, you're not in the right headspace. And so I'll just put the dog up. I'm like, that's not going to go well, right? You're not in the right pace, right? I'm like, skip a meal, find something else, let's bring you back. If you're talking about younger dogs, puppies and adolescent dogs, they have a daily biorhythm, right? Your puppy's on fire first thing in the morning, like you're like, Jesus, they're out of their mind, right? But if you break your puppy out at 2 in the afternoon, they're like, ugh. What are we doing, right? Terrible time to work engagement. Don't do it there, right? So pay attention to the puppies are usually on fire in the morning and right when you want to go to bed. Whatever that is, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And like tearing around like maniacs. You're like, oh man. And so that's when so you may need to take advantage of that with certain dogs, and especially younger dogs. They'll be better at certain times of day. I don't want to rely on that for the whole life of the dog, obviously, but in the beginning you may need to, right? And so pay attention to your dog's energetics there. If my dog's not into it, I'm not going to do the session. Then make a mental note of what your dog feels like when they're really into it. And I judge that by the intensity of their focus, but also how they take rewards from me, right? So if I give the dog the reward and they're pounding my hand, like rip it off my hand, swallow that thing whole and look at me, I'm like, okay, that's what you feel like when you're really into it. So if they are taking it kind of gently and they're looking around while they're chewing it, then they're telling me, I'm not so into it, right? In that same sense. So I recognize the difference between what's ideal and what you're giving me right now, right? It's the same thing with focus. My dog could be looking at me, or my dog could be looking at me. Come on, right? And there's a difference in those energetics. Recognize them. When you're working, make note. At school, all the students have to keep a training journal. I highly recommend you keep a training journal for all your dogs, right? And we put everything in there. So basically the way I start a training journal is first bit is the ideal. What do I think I want to do with this dog? Like, I don't know. I'm fantasizing, it's going to be an agility dog. It's going to do police work. It's going to be, I want it to be a good pet. I love to go hiking. What is it, make a list of the things that you think you want to do with your dog. You don't know, maybe you're not getting there. Maybe this isn't the right dog for that, and so you check some stuff off the list. But make an idea of, okay, these are the things I want to do. Then identify all the behaviors that they would have to do those things. Make a list. What's my dog going to have to know to do this stuff? Right? They have to know how to lay politely on their bed in the living room. They have to know how to retrieve. They have to know how to jump. They have to know how to whatever, track, like whatever. Make a list of all the behaviors. So now you have a kind of ideal template. And then write down your day-to-day routine with your dog. How much you fed them, when you fed them, like how much exercise, how long your training sessions are, all that stuff. Put it all in there. And for each training session, I write down in the journal ahead of time what I plan to do in that training session. What are you intending to do in that training session? Then when you finish the training session, write down what you actually did, right? Very good to have a plan in dog training, but you also have to be ready to abandon it at a moment's notice. You're like, I come in, we're going to work on this. Oh, no, we're not. Okay, we're working on this instead, right? It shifts gears all the time, right? Engagement, I do an engagement at home. It's going really well. I'm going to practice it. I think I'm going to go do engagement somewhere else. I take my dog out. My dog's head is not in the space. About turn, we're not doing that now, right? And so you alter your training plan all the time. So write down what you intended to do. And then afterwards, write down what you actually did. And your impressions. Like the dog was really on fire today, like taking the food with lots of energy. My session was 5 minutes long. I felt really good energy all the way to the end, etc. Or my dog seemed a little out of it today, a little more checking out than normal, all that kind of stuff. And then you can look for patterns, right? So if I say, I noticed that if I train twice a day, then my dog is really good. When I go to a third one, the third one's a little flat. I like to take my dog for a run in the morning, right? So on the mornings that I do a run, my dog's first session is kind of lackadaisical. It's not so good, right? And so another dog may say, like, my dog is like super scattered, but I exercised the dog a little bit this morning, and then when we trained, my dog seemed more settled and more focused and was better, right? So you'll see those patterns. I guarantee in the beginning, you will not hold all this stuff in your head. If I said, like, how many reps did you do in your last session? I don't know. Somewhere between 5 and 100? I don't know. Somewhere, like, it's not something you're gonna remember right off the top of your head, right? And if I say, like, hey, you took your dog for a walk, how long was it? How much? Did you play ball with your dog? Did you let your dog play with the other dogs? I cut my young dog out to play with the other dogs. He was out there for an hour. My morning training session was shot. My dog spent all his energy doing that. Now isn't so into the training stuff. And some dogs, it's great. You're going along, they can do all those things and still have energy for training. Other dogs, not so much, right? And so that will help you recognize how to control your dog. Because motivation, which we're going to talk about extensively tomorrow, is not just written in stone. It's created, there's a genetic component to it, absolutely. Dogs have certain energies and certain commitments, but it's also nurtured, built, and dogs have a finite amount of energy, period, to spread over a certain number of activities. And so if I'm using it up on activities that aren't benefiting my training, then my training may not go so well, and I may have to back off on that stuff, right? And so those are all adjustments that you'll make on the individual dog, right, as you go along. Another thing that's important in engagement a lot is the idea of novelty, right? So I mentioned this idea of expectation of rewards, right? And in the beginning, I make very sure when I'm creating engagement that I do not violate the dog's expectations in the early stages, right? And expectations can be created within a session or connected to location or over the period of time. So if I'm training in this building and I'm using steak every day that I come in this building, I mentioned, then this building signals steak, right? Or I can create an expectation in a given training session, right? I come into a training session, I start out with steak, and then I run out of steak, but I've got kibble in my other pocket, so I go to switch to that. Do not violate your dog's expectations downward in the early stages of engagement training. Later, we can talk about forcing the dog to engage in a lower value activity to go into a higher value activity, but don't set up a situation where they're expecting that higher value reward and then you give them something junky. Lots of people will throw a whole bunch of different kinds of treats in together in their pouch, right? In the early, thinking variety is the spice of life, right? So I figure my dog's gonna get bored with one, and it's true that changing rewards can add novelty, and some dogs like that. But if I have a whole bunch of different ones, I reach in every time, and so if they get their favorite one, and the next time I reach in, it's one of their least favorite ones, now I'm basically punishing them because they're like, ooh, I just got cheese. I freaking love cheese. The next time it comes out, ooh, it's a Zooks. Ugh. Like, damn, maybe I don't want to do this anymore, right? And so I will sometimes start training sessions with two separate types of rewards, a lower value one, which I start with, and then partway through I jump to a higher value one. And the dogs go, oh yeah. And the contrast there makes them interested in the higher value. It also allows me to sometimes extend my sessions a little bit, right? Because now my dog is getting satiated and not willing to work for the lower value, but I maybe get a few more reps if I switch to something higher value to end the session, kind of thing, right? We do that sometimes too. I'll do a food session with my young dogs, and then I'll end up and play with them a little bit at the end of the session, right? You have to be careful a little bit about this, that the dogs don't say, like, can we skip the food part and just go straight to the toy part? So if my dog starts to go like, nah, I think if your toy's coming, then screw this part, right? I have to be careful about that. But some dogs, that energizes their food work, and I can prolong my sessions a little bit that way. So be careful about the type of rewards and switching rewards within a session.